Hello, dear viewers. Before we begin tonight's tale, I want to express my gratitude for your ongoing support. If this story appeals to you, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell. Now, let's dim the lights and ease into this evening's chilling narrative. We don't speak of the twins, the matriarch had said, and now I understand why. My grandmother's house always felt as though it occupied its own unique pocket of reality. Tucked away at the terminus of a winding dirt road deep in rural Vermont, encircled by a thick forest of ancient maples, the three-story Victorian stood tall with its weathered clapboard siding and sharply pitched gabled roof. As a child, I passed every summer there, wandering through its innumerable rooms, uncovering secret nooks, and playing in the expansive gardens my grandmother maintained with near religious devotion. However, one particular room remained perpetually off-limits, a locked bedroom situated at the far end of the third-floor corridor. Whenever I would inquire about it, my grandmother's lips would press into a firm, thin line, and she would shake her head. "That's not something we discuss," she would whisper, her voice dropping low. "Certain doors are meant to remain closed." Naturally, my childhood curiosity only intensified my determination to unravel its mysteries. During thunderstorms, I would press my ear against the substantial oak door, convinced I could detect faint echoes of children's laughter drifting from within. On one occasion, I even attempted to peer through the keyhole, only to find it obstructed by something that completely blocked my view. When I later posed the question to my mother, her expression paled. "We do not speak of the twins," she responded sharply, promptly changing the subject. That was the sole instance I ever heard anyone reference twins in our family, and those words lingered in my consciousness for many years afterward. Following college, I relocated to advance my career, and my visits to my grandmother's residence grew increasingly sporadic. Life possesses a tendency to sweep you forward, carrying you along its current until childhood enigmas gradually recede into the background. However, when my grandmother passed away last month at 97, I found myself traveling back down the familiar unpaved road, observing the thick tree canopy closing overhead. The funeral was modest. My grandmother had survived most of her contemporaries, and our family had always been limited, just my mother, my Aunt Catherine, and a handful of distant relatives I scarcely recognized. My grandmother had served as the matriarch, the foundation holding our scattered family together. Without her presence, we drifted apart like satellites losing orbit. After the service, we assembled at the old house. Somehow it appeared smaller, diminished by my grandmother's absence. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight as I meandered through the rooms, letting my fingers trail across dusty antique furniture surfaces and faded photographs. My mother discovered me in the library, gazing at a portrait of my grandmother as a young woman. She appeared so transformed then, her face smooth, her eyes bright with youth and possibility. "She left the house to you," my mother said quietly, extending a thick envelope. "Along with this." I accepted the envelope from her hand. It felt substantial, sealed with wax impressed by my grandmother's signet ring, an elaborate pattern of intertwined roses. Inside rested a key, aged brass ornately crafted, accompanied by a letter written in my grandmother's meticulous handwriting. "My dearest Eliza. Asterisk if you're reading this, I have departed from this world. The house now belongs to you, together with all its secrets. I've borne this burden far too long and cannot carry it to my grave. The enclosed key will grant access to the locked room on the third floor. What awaits you there may prove disturbing, yet I believe you deserve to understand the truth about our family, asterisk. Asterisk the twins arrived in the summer of 1952. Your grandfather and I were overjoyed. Twins hadn't been born in our family for generations. However, joy swiftly transformed into despair. From the beginning, something was wrong with them. Something I still cannot bring myself to describe, even now, asterisk. Asterisk, we did what we believed best at the time. Perhaps it was mistaken. Perhaps we should have pursued help. But fear and shame can drive people to terrible decisions. Asterisk. Asterisk, I've preserved their room exactly as it was. Some might consider it morbid, but I could never bring myself to completely erase them. They remained my children nonetheless. Asterisk. Asterisk, forgive me, Eliza, and proceed with caution. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. Asterisk. With eternal love. Grandmother. I perused the letter 3 times, my hands trembling more intensely with each reading. The key felt unnaturally cold pressed against my palm, as though stored somewhere devoid of sunlight for decades, which I supposed it had been. My mother observed me from the doorway, her expression etched with concern. "What does it say?" she inquired. I hesitated momentarily, then folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket. "Nothing significant," I lied. "Simply some instructions concerning the house." That night, after everyone had departed and the house settled into its familiar creaks and groans, I discovered myself standing at the base of the staircase ascending to the 3rd floor. The key weighed heavily in my pocket. Part of me wished to discard it, to honor my grandmother's lifetime of silence. Yet curiosity has always been my undoing. The 3rd floor corridor lay in darkness, illuminated solely by moonlight streaming through a small window at its end. The floorboards protested beneath my weight as I proceeded down the passage, past dusty paintings and forgotten furniture draped in white sheets. Upon reaching the locked door, I paused, my hand hovering over the knob. Was I truly prepared for this, to unearth a family secret buried for over 70 years? Before I could reconsider, I inserted the key into the lock. It turned with surprising smoothness, as though regularly oiled and maintained. The door swung open on silent hinges, unveiling a room bathed in silver moonlight. My eyes required moments to adjust to the dimness. When they did, I perceived a nursery preserved as though frozen in time. 2 matching cribs stood side by side against the far wall, their white paint yellowed with age. A rocking chair occupied the corner, a knitted blanket draped across its arm. Toys, wooden blocks, cloth dolls, tin soldiers, were arranged neatly on shelves and tables, awaiting hands that would never play with them again. The air inside, though stale, carried a faint lavender scent mixed with something else I couldn't quite identify. I stepped inside, half anticipating the laughter I'd imagined as a child. Yet the room remained silent, guarding its secrets closely. On a dresser between the cribs stood a silver-framed photograph. I lifted it, wiping away a thin dust layer with my thumb. The image depicted my grandmother, considerably younger, holding 2 infants wrapped in matching blankets. She was smiling, yet even in the faded photograph, I could discern strain around her eyes, tension in her shoulders. I replaced the photograph and approached the cribs. They stood empty, save for small handmade quilts embroidered with names, Theodore and Theodora. I traced my fingers over the stitching, experiencing a connection to these unknown relatives who shared my blood but not my era. Something caught my attention, a journal resting on the nightstand beside the rocking chair. The leather cover was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and fragile. I carefully opened it to the first entry, dated June 15, 1952. Asterisk, today I gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. The labor was difficult, at times I feared I wouldn't survive. But they're here now, and they're perfect. Theodore and Theodora, my beautiful children, asterisk. The handwriting was my grandmother's, though shakier than the precise script I knew. I turned the page. Asterisk, June 20th, 1952. Something is wrong with the twins. They cry constantly, but not like normal babies. It's more like screaming. The doctor insists it's just colic and will pass. Yet there's something in their eyes when they regard me, something knowing. It frightens me, though I'm ashamed to admit it. June 25, 1952. They've stopped crying. Now they simply stare, tracking me with their eyes as I move about the nursery. They don't sleep when they should. Instead, they lie awake in their cribs, watching. Always watching. The nurse resigned today. Said she couldn't endure the way they looked at her. Harold thinks I'm being hysterical, but he hasn't been the one caring for them day and night. I flipped through subsequent entries, each more disturbing than the previous. My grandmother described how the twins developed at an alarming rate, sitting up and speaking their first words at merely 3 months old. How they would whisper to each other in a language no one else could comprehend. How pets and small animals near the house began disappearing, only for the twins to be discovered playing with bones and fur. September 3, 1952. I caught Theodora standing over Theodore's crib last night, pressing a pillow against his face. When I screamed, she turned toward me with such hatred in her eyes. She's only 3 months old. It's impossible. Yet, September 10, 1952. Harold wants to take them to specialists in Boston. I agreed, but secretly I'm terrified of what the doctors might discover. What if they take my babies away? Despite everything, they're still my children. I still love them. God help me, I do. September 15, 1952. The doctors found nothing physically wrong with the twins. They described their development as advanced but not concerning. Harold felt relieved, but I know better. I've witnessed what they do when they believe no one is watching, the way they communicate without speaking, the way small animals die in their presence. There's something inside them. Something not right. Not human. The entries continued, growing more frantic and paranoid. My grandmother chronicled strange occurrences throughout the house, objects moving independently, voices whispering from empty rooms, shadows shifting against the light, and always the twins at the center, watching with their identical dark eyes. November 28, 1952. Harold doesn't believe me. He suggests I'm suffering from some form of postpartum psychosis. Perhaps he's right. Perhaps I am losing my mind. But I know what I witnessed last night. I know what I heard. I awakened to singing, a woman's voice, soft and sweet, emanating from the nursery. When I went to investigate, I discovered the twins standing in their cribs, holding hands through the bars, their eyes closed. The singing originated from somewhere above them, yet no one else occupied the room. When they sensed my presence, they opened their eyes in unison. "Grandmother is coming," they said together. "She wants to play with us." My grandmother has been deceased for 12 years. My hands trembled so violently I could barely turn the pages. The subsequent entry was dated nearly a month later, the handwriting almost unrecognizable, jagged and desperate, as though written in tremendous haste. December 24, 1952. Harold is dead. They killed him. I know they did, though the police are calling it an accident. He fell down the stairs. They claim he broke his neck. But I heard them giggling afterward. I heard them say, "One down. I can't stay here. I can't leave them alone. They're my children. My responsibility. God forgive me for what I'm about to do." The next entry was the last, dated Christmas Day, 1952, "It's done. May God have mercy on my soul." I closed the journal, my mind reeling. What had my grandmother done? What had become of the twins? If they had died, Why weren't they interred in the family plot beside my grandfather? I needed answers, and I knew where to search for them. The attic had always been prohibited during my childhood, another forbidden space within a house full of secrets. The narrow staircase leading to it was concealed behind a panel in the hallway closet, designed to merge seamlessly with the surrounding wall. I located it easily enough. Some memories never fade, regardless of how many years pass. The stairs groaned beneath my weight as I ascended, my flashlight beam cutting through decades of accumulated dust and cobwebs. The attic stretched vast, spanning the entire house length, its ceiling following the roof's steep pitch. Trunks and boxes were stacked in orderly rows, each labeled in my grandmother's handwriting: Christmas decorations 1960s, Harold's clothes, family photographs pre-1950. I ventured deeper into the space, scanning labels until I discovered what I sought, a trunk marked simply T&T 1952. It was locked, but the key from my grandmother's letter fit perfectly. Inside, I found additional journals, medical records, and a stack of photographs bound with twine. I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor and commenced reading. The medical records originated from a private sanitarium in Switzerland, admission forms for 2 children, Theodore and Theodora Montgomery, dated January 3, 1953. The diagnosis listed for both was severe psychopathy with homicidal tendencies. Treatment notes spanning years documented various therapies and medications, all apparently ineffective. The final entry, dated December 1960, simply stated, "Patients deceased following unsuccessful experimental treatment." I set the records aside and untied the photographs. They depicted the twins at various ages, as infants, toddlers, and finally as children of approximately 8 or 9. In the earliest images, they appeared like normal babies, chubby-cheeked and innocent. Yet in later photographs, something undeniably disturbing emerged. Nothing I could specifically identify, their features remained symmetrical, their smiles appropriate, but their eyes were empty, like peering into a deep well and seeing nothing reflected back. The final photograph showed them standing side by side in what appeared to be a hospital room, wearing matching white gowns. They held hands, their faces expressionless. Written on the reverse in my grandmother's handwriting, * the last photograph. May they find peace, *. Had my grandmother actually sent her own children away? Had she institutionalized them for 8 years before some experimental treatment ended their lives? It seemed unthinkable. Yet the evidence lay directly before me. I was about to close the trunk when I noticed something else at the bottom, a small leather-bound book different from the journals. It appeared older, the cover worn smooth from handling. When I opened it, I realized it wasn't a book at all but a collection of newspaper clippings carefully preserved between tissue-thin pages. The clippings dated back to the early 1900s, each documenting a similar story: twins born to women in my family, followed by unexplained deaths, mysterious illnesses, or the twins themselves disappearing under suspicious circumstances. The pattern repeated generation after generation, always twins, always tragedy. The final clipping was from a local newspaper dated December 26, 1952, my grandfather's obituary. It mentioned his surviving wife and infant twins, yet there was no mention of my mother, who would have been 5 years old at the time. I checked the other journals seeking any mention of my mother and found a single entry from 1950, * Margaret turns 3 today. She brings such joy, normal, healthy, everything a child should be. I thank God daily that she wasn't born a twin. Perhaps the curse has skipped a generation, *. A curse? What was my grandmother discussing? And if my mother was 5 when the twins were born, why had she never mentioned having siblings? I needed to speak with my mother. I gathered the journals and photographs, stuffing them into a canvas bag I discovered hanging on a nearby hook. As I turned to leave, my flashlight beam caught something in the far attic corner, something that didn't belong among the trunks and furniture. It was a door, small, barely 4 feet high, set into the sloped ceiling. It appeared newer than the surrounding architecture, the wood less weathered, the hinges less rusted. No lock adorned it, merely a simple latch keeping it closed. Common sense urged me to leave it alone, to take what I'd found and exit the attic. Yet I had ventured too far to stop now. I approached the door and lifted the latch. The space beyond lay dark, the air noticeably colder. My flashlight revealed a small room with a sharply angled ceiling, empty except for 2 rocking chairs facing each other in the center. They were child-sized, painted white with faded paint cushions tied to their seats. As my light swept across the room, I noticed something else, markings on the walls, floor, and ceiling forming an intricate pattern that seemed to shift and move in my flashlight beam. I stepped closer, attempting to comprehend the symbols. They belonged to no language I recognized, yet they evoked an uneasy sensation, as though they were words human mouths weren't meant to articulate. A sudden noise behind me made me whirl around, my heart pounding in my chest. The door had swung shut, though no breeze in the attic could account for it. I lunged for the handle, but it wouldn't budge, as though held closed by an invisible force. Panic rose in my throat as I threw my shoulder against the door once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th attempt, it gave way suddenly, sending me sprawling onto the attic floor. I scrambled upright and ran, not stopping until I reached the main staircase, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I needed answers, and I needed them immediately. I discovered my mother in the kitchen, seated at the table with a cup of tea growing cold between her hands. She looked up as I entered, her eyes widening at the sight of the canvas bag clutched in my white-knuckled grip. "You've been in the attic," she said. It wasn't a question. I emptied the bag's contents onto the table, the journals, the medical records, the photographs. "Tell me about the twins," I demanded, my voice shaking. "Tell me what happened to Theodore and Theodora." My mother's face drained of color as she stared at the items spread before her. For a moment, I thought she might faint. Then she drew a deep breath and gestured for me to sit. "I was 5 when they were born," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I remember being excited to have a brother and sister. But from the beginning, something was wrong with them. They didn't cry like normal babies, they simply stared, watching everything, everyone. Mother became obsessed with them, convinced they were somehow evil." She picked up one of the photographs, her finger tracing the outline of the twins' faces. Father didn't believe her. He thought she was experiencing some form of postpartum psychosis. He wanted to obtain help for her, but she refused to leave the twins alone with anyone else. She was afraid of what they might do. "And then he died," I said softly. My mother nodded. "They called it an accident, that he tripped and fell down the stairs in the middle of the night. But I was awake. I heard them laughing afterward. Theodore and Theodora, laughing in their cribs. They were only 6 months old." A chill ran down my spine. What happened next? Mother took them away after Christmas. She told everyone they had died of pneumonia, but she actually sent them to some private hospital in Europe. I didn't know where until years later, when I discovered some of her correspondence. By then, they genuinely were dead. Some experimental treatment went wrong, or so the hospital claimed. She paused. And the room on the 3rd floor, the nursery, Mother preserved it exactly as it was the day she took them away. She would go in there sometimes, just to sit. She never permitted anyone else inside. I think she felt guilty. Despite everything, they remained her children. I hesitated, then voiced the question burning in my mind since reading the journals: do you believe they were evil? Actually evil. My mother remained silent for a long moment, her fingers still tracing the photograph. "I believe there are things in this world we cannot explain," she said finally. "Things beyond our comprehension." The twins were something else. Something not quite human. "The journals mentioned a curse," I pressed. "Something about twins in our family." My mother sighed deeply. "It's an old family legend. Every few generations, twins are born to the women in our line, and those twins are never right. They bring death and destruction. The only way to end the cycle is to—" She trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. "To kill them," I supplied, my voice hollow. She nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "Mother couldn't do it. She couldn't kill her own children, regardless of what they were, so she sent them away instead. But the guilt ate at her for the rest of her life." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of this family secret pressing down on us like a physical presence. Finally, my mother reached across the table and took my hand. "You need to leave this house, Eliza," she said urgently. "Sell it. Burn it down. I don't care. But don't remain here. The twins, their influence lingers. I've felt it all my life, like a shadow at the edge of my vision. Promise me you won't stay." I promised. Yet even as the words left my mouth, I knew I wouldn't keep them. I had ventured too far, uncovered too much, to simply walk away now. Some piece of the puzzle remained missing, something I hadn't yet discovered. That night, I dreamed of the twins. They stood at the foot of my bed, holding hands, their faces expressionless. "Play with us, Eliza," they said in unison, their voices neither male nor female, neither child nor adult. "Grandmother is waiting." I woke with a start, my nightgown soaked with sweat. The bedroom lay dark, yet I could have sworn I saw two small figures retreating through the door, hand in hand. The following morning, my mother departed early, citing urgent business back in the city. I believe she couldn't bear remaining in the house any longer, surrounded by memories and ghosts. I didn't attempt to stop her. In fact, I felt relieved to have the house to myself, to continue my investigation without her concerned glances and whispered warnings. I spent the day combing through the remaining trunks in the attic, searching for any additional information about the twins or the supposed family curse. I discovered birth and death certificates for generations of twins dating back to the 1800s, all showing the same pattern: twins born, tragedy following closely behind, the twins themselves dying young or disappearing. Yet it was in a hidden compartment in my grandmother's desk that I found the most disturbing evidence yet, a small leather-bound volume titled The Montgomery Family Grimoire. The book was handwritten in different styles, suggesting it had been passed down and added to over generations. Its pages contained rituals, spells, and incantations, many focusing on protection against malevolent spirits and entities. One passage in particular caught my attention. The twin curse has plagued the women of our line since Abigail Montgomery made her pact with the entity in 1723. Every third generation, twin children are born who serve as vessels for this entity's influence in our world. They appear human but are not. They wear the faces of innocence but harbor ancient malice. The only true protection is to end their existence before they can fully manifest their powers, preferably before their first birthday. If this cannot be done, they must be bound using the ritual of containment, though this is a temporary measure at best. The entity cannot be destroyed, only delayed in its purpose. The book went on to describe the ritual of containment in detail, a complex ceremony involving symbols drawn in specific patterns, incantations spoken at precise intervals, and various herbs and minerals arranged in a protective circle. The goal was to bind the entity to a specific location, preventing it from spreading its influence beyond those boundaries. With growing dread, I realized that the symbols I had seen in the small room behind the attic door matched those described in the grimoire. My grandmother had performed the ritual, binding whatever malevolent force inhabited the twins to that tiny space. But according to the grimoire, such bindings were temporary, requiring renewal every 25 years. My grandmother had died just over a month ago. The binding would be weakening. As if to confirm my fears, I began noticing subtle changes in the house. Doors I was certain I had closed would be open when I returned. Objects would disappear, only to reappear in unlikely places. At night, I would hear footsteps in the hallway, the creak of rocking chairs, childish whispers just beyond the threshold of hearing. I told myself it was merely my imagination, fueled by sleep deprivation and the disturbing information I had uncovered. Yet deep down, I knew better. Something was awakening in the old house, something that had been bound and contained for decades. I needed to perform the ritual again, to strengthen the binding before whatever was trapped in that attic room broke free completely. But the grimoire warned that the ritual was dangerous for the uninitiated, potentially fatal if performed incorrectly. I needed help. My Aunt Catherine had always been the family's black sheep, estranged from my grandmother for reasons no one ever explained. She lived in a small cottage on the town's outskirts, surrounded by gardens filled with herbs and flowers most people would consider weeds. Local children called her a witch, though never to her face. Rumors suggested she practiced the old ways, whatever that meant. I had always been fond of Aunt Catherine, despite seeing her rarely. She possessed a warmth my grandmother lacked, a genuine interest in my life and thoughts. If anyone would know about family curses and binding rituals, it would be her. I found her in her garden, kneeling among rows of plants I couldn't identify, her gray hair pulled back in a loose braid. She didn't appear surprised to see me. "I've been expecting you," she said, rising to her feet with a grace that belied her 70 years. "Come inside. We have much to discuss." Her cottage was exactly as I remembered from childhood visits, cozy and cluttered, smelling of herbs and wood smoke. Books lined every available surface, their spines cracked and faded from use. Bundles of dried plants hung from the ceiling beams, and various crystals caught the light streaming through the windows. She led me to a small table by the window and gestured for me to sit. "You found the grimoire," she said without preamble. "And you've been in the binding room." I nodded, not bothering to ask how she knew. "The twins," I began. "Were never twins at all," she finished for me. "At least not in the way you're thinking." She rose and went to a cabinet in the corner, returning with a wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. From it, she removed a stack of yellowed photographs, placing them carefully on the table between us. "These are the twins from each generation," she explained, spreading the photos out like a macabre family tree. "Look closely." I leaned forward, studying the images. Each showed a pair of children, a boy and a girl at various ages. Different faces, different time periods, different clothing. Yet something eerily similar connected all of them, something in the eyes, in the expressionless set of their mouths. "They look related," I said hesitantly. "They look identical," Aunt Catherine corrected. "Not to each other, but across generations. The Theodore from 1952 looks exactly like the Thomas from 1903, who looks exactly like the Timothy from 1854. And the same for the girls, because they're not different children at all. They're the same entity, born again and again into our family, wearing slightly different faces but carrying the same essence." I shook my head, trying to process her words. "That's impossible." "Is it?" She tapped one of the photographs, my grandmother's twins at about 5 years old. "Look at their eyes. Really look." I did as she asked and felt a chill run through me. There was something ancient in those childish eyes, something that had witnessed centuries come and go, something patient and calculating and utterly inhuman. What are they? I whispered. We don't know. Not really, Aunt Catherine replied. The grimoire calls it an entity, but that's merely a word for something we don't understand. It made a pact with Abigail Montgomery in 1723, power and prosperity for the family in exchange for allowing it to incarnate every third generation. Abigail agreed, not comprehending what she was doing. By the time she realized her mistake, it was too late. And my grandmother, the ritual she performed. Elizabeth was always the strongest of us. When her twins began showing their true nature, she researched the old ways, discovered the binding ritual. She couldn't bring herself to kill them, they were the faces of her children, after all. So she bound the entity to that room in the attic, containing its influence. But the binding is weakening, I said. I can feel it. Aunt Catherine nodded gravely. The ritual must be renewed every quarter century, or upon the death of the one who performed it, whichever comes first. Elizabeth is gone. The binding is failing. Then we need to perform it again, I said with more confidence than I felt. The grimoire has the instructions. It's not that simple, Eliza. The ritual requires blood from a direct descendant of the twins. Elizabeth used her own blood as their mother. But now, I realized. My mother is a direct descendant, but not me. Exactly. And Margaret would never participate. She spent her life running from this family legacy. That leaves only one option. I felt coldness settle in my stomach as I understood her implication. Catherine, are you saying what I think you're saying? She met my gaze steadily. I am Elizabeth's younger sister. We share the same blood. I can perform the ritual, but I will need your help. It's dangerous, Eliza. If something goes wrong, what choice do we have? I interrupted. If we do nothing, whatever is in that room will break free completely. Catherine studied me for a long moment, then nodded. We'll need to prepare. The ritual must be performed at midnight, when the veil between worlds is thinnest, and we'll need supplies. She rose and began pulling books from shelves, jars from cabinets. Take these, she said, handing me a list. Go to the old apothecary on Maple Street. Mr. Chen knows me. Tell him I sent you. I spent the afternoon gathering the necessary items, rare herbs, specific minerals, candles made from beeswax and animal fat. Mr. Chen asked no questions as he packaged everything carefully, though his eyes held a knowing sadness when I mentioned my aunt's name. By the time I returned to my grandmother's house, my house now, I reminded myself, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. The house seemed to loom larger in the fading light, its windows like watchful eyes tracking my approach. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. The air felt thick, charged with an energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. As I moved through the foyer, I could have sworn I heard childish laughter echoing from somewhere deep within the house. Aunt Catherine arrived just after sunset, carrying a large leather satchel and wearing an expression of grim determination. They know what we're planning, she said without preamble. They'll try to stop us. We worked quickly, preparing the items for the ritual according to the grimoire's instructions. Catherine mixed herbs in specific proportions, grinding them with a mortar and pestle while chanting softly under her breath. I arranged candles in the pattern described in the book, a 5-pointed star within a circle, with specific minerals placed at each point. As midnight approached, we made our way to the attic, carrying our supplies in solemn procession. The house seemed to resist our progress, doors suddenly difficult to open, floorboards creaking protestingly beneath our feet. The temperature dropped noticeably as we ascended the narrow staircase to the third floor, our breath visible in the chilled air. The nursery door stood open when we reached it, though I was certain I had closed and locked it after my initial exploration. Inside, the room appeared undisturbed, the crib standing silent vigil in the moonlight. But something felt different, a presence, a watchfulness that hadn't been there before. "Don't look at the photograph," Catherine warned as we passed through. "Don't look at anything too closely. Keep your mind focused on what we're doing." The attic stairs felt steeper than I remembered, the darkness at the top more absolute. My flashlight flickered, the beam weakening despite fresh batteries. Catherine produced a lantern from her satchel, an old-fashioned thing of brass and glass, the flame inside burning with unnaturally steady light. "Oil blessed by a priest in 1842, she explained, seeing my questioning look. "Some things can't be corrupted." The door to the binding room was open, swung wide as though in invitation. Beyond it, the two child-sized rocking chairs were moving gently back and forth, though no breeze in the attic could account for the motion. They stopped abruptly as we entered, the sudden stillness more unnerving than the movement had been. "Work quickly," Catherine instructed, setting the lantern on the floor. "Draw the circle exactly as shown in the grimoire. I'll prepare the incantation." I began sketching the complex pattern on the wooden floor using chalk made from crushed bone and ash. The symbols felt wrong somehow, as though they belonged to no human language, angles that hurt the eye to follow, curves that seemed to bend in impossible directions. As I drew, I could feel resistance, as if the floor itself were fighting against the markings. Catherine stood in the room's center, reciting words from the grimoire in a language I didn't recognize. Her voice rose and fell in strange cadences, sometimes dropping to a whisper, sometimes rising to a near shout. The temperature plummeted, frost forming on the walls and ceiling despite the summer heat outside. As I completed the circle, connecting the last line to the first, a shock ran through my body like an electrical current. The symbols began glowing with pale blue light, illuminating the room more brightly than the lantern. "The candles," Catherine ordered, her voice strained. "Place them at the points of the star. Quickly." I scrambled to obey, positioning the black candles at each intersection of the star pattern within the circle. As I placed the last one, Catherine began the final phase of the ritual, drawing a small silver knife across her palm. Blood welled from the cut, dripping onto the grimoire she held open before her. "With blood of the line, I bind thee," she intoned. "With words of power, I contain thee. By salt and iron, by silver and ash, I command thee to remain within these bounds until the appointed time." The symbols flared brighter, the blue light shifting to a deep pulsing red. The rocking chairs began moving again, faster and faster, the wood creaking in protest at the unnatural motion. The temperature dropped further, ice crystals forming in the air around us. And then came the voices, childish yet ancient, speaking in unison from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You cannot bind us forever, daughter of Montgomery. We are eternal. We are patient. We will have what was promised to us." Catherine faltered, her face pale in the eerie light. I moved to her side, supporting her as she swayed on her feet. "Continue the ritual," I urged. "We have to finish it." She nodded, drawing a shaky breath. "Final words to seal the binding," she murmured, turning to the last page of the grimoire. Her eyes widened in shock. "It's gone. The final incantation, it's been erased." I looked over her shoulder and saw she was right. Where text should have been, there was only blank space, as though the words had been lifted cleanly from the page. "How is that possible?" I whispered. The book was locked in my grandmother's desk. "They've been planning this," Catherine realized, horror dawning on her face. "All these years they've been waiting, influencing events from within their prison. They knew Elizabeth would die. Knew the binding would weaken. They've prepared. The voices came again, louder now, accompanied by the sound of childish laughter that raised goosebumps on my skin. Did you think we were helpless? Did you think we were contained? Foolish women, playing with forces you cannot comprehend. The pact cannot be broken. The promise must be fulfilled. The symbols on the floor began fading, the glowing light dimming as the binding weakened further. The rocking chairs stopped abruptly, and in the sudden silence, I heard a new sound, small footsteps approaching the door of the binding room. "We need the final words," I said desperately. "Catherine, think. My grandmother must have told you something. Left some clue." Catherine closed her eyes, her brow furrowed in concentration. Elizabeth knew this might happen. She would have prepared a contingency. Her eyes snapped open. The music box in the nursery, the one that plays that eerie lullaby. Elizabeth always kept it wound. Always made sure it worked. I thought it was just sentimentality, but I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran, ducking through the small door and racing across the attic. Behind me, I heard Catherine continuing the ritual, her voice raised in defiance against the childish taunts filling the air. The nursery was different when I entered this time, the air thick with malevolence, the shadows deeper and more substantial. The cribs seemed to loom larger, the toys arranged on the shelves watching me with invisible eyes. On the dresser between the cribs sat a delicate porcelain music box painted with scenes of children playing in a garden. I approached cautiously, half expecting it to shatter or disappear before I could reach it. Yet it remained solid and real under my trembling fingers as I lifted the lid. A tinkling melody began to play, a lullaby I recognized from my own childhood, the notes slightly discordant, slightly wrong. Inside the box, nestled on a cushion of faded velvet, was a small piece of paper folded into a tight square. I unfolded it carefully, revealing a single sentence written in my grandmother's precise hand. "To end what began, return them to where they first came." I stared at the words, trying to decipher their meaning. Return them. Return who? The twins. But they were dead, had been for decades. And where had they first come from? A child's voice spoke directly behind me, so close I could feel breath on my neck. She could never do it. She was too weak. "But you're not weak, are you, Eliza?" I whirled around, but the nursery was empty. The voice came again from the direction of the cribs. "We've been waiting for you. We knew you would come back to this house eventually. Blood calls to blood." In the crib on the left, a small shape was forming, solidifying out of the shadows, the outline of a child, a boy of about 8 with dark hair and darker eyes. In the second crib, a similar shape appeared, a girl identical to the boy in every way except for her longer hair. "Theodore," I whispered. "Theodora." They smiled in unison, the expression never reaching their eyes. "We've had many names," they said together. "Many faces, but always the same purpose." "What purpose?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. "To collect what is owed," they replied. "A soul from each generation, payment for the pact Abigail made. Prosperity and power in exchange for us." I backed away, clutching the paper from the music box. "My grandmother bound you," I said. "She found a way to contain you." Their laughter sounded like broken glass. "Temporarily. But bindings weaken. People die. And we are very, very patient." From somewhere above, I heard Catherine cry out in pain. The ritual was failing. Whatever contingency my grandmother had planned, I needed to figure it out now. I looked down at the paper again. "To end what began, return them to where they first came." Where had it all begun? The pact Abigail Montgomery had made in 1723. The cemetery, I realized aloud. the family mausoleum. Abigail is buried there. The twins' smiles faltered, their forms flickering like candles in a breeze. You know nothing, they hissed, but I could hear the uncertainty in their voices. I turned and ran, the paper clutched in my hand, the twins' angry cries following me down the stairs. Outside, the night was unnaturally still, the moon hidden behind clouds that had appeared from nowhere. I ran across the overgrown lawn toward the small family cemetery at the property's edge, my heart hammering in my chest. The Montgomery Mausoleum stood at the cemetery center, a small neoclassical structure of weathered marble. The door was locked, but the key my grandmother had left me, the one that had opened the nursery, fit this lock as well. Inside, stone sarcophagi lined the walls, each engraved with names and dates spanning centuries. At the far end, set apart from the others, was a plain stone altar. I approached it cautiously, running my fingers over the smooth surface. No engravings, no decorations, nothing to indicate its purpose or significance. But as my hand passed over the center, I felt a slight depression, a space that seemed designed for something to fit inside. Behind me, the temperature dropped suddenly, frost forming on the stone walls. I turned to see the twins standing in the doorway, their forms more substantial now, more real. It won't work, they said, their voices echoing in the confined space. You don't have what's needed. You don't have the grimoire. The grimoire, the family book of spells and rituals. It was still in the attic with Catherine. Without it, I had no idea what ritual to perform, what words to say to end this. But as I looked at the twins, at their identical expressions of smug certainty, a realization struck me. The final ritual wasn't in the grimoire at all. My grandmother had removed it, hidden it separately in the music box, because the grimoire itself was part of the problem, part of the pact Abigail had made. I don't need the grimoire, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. I just need to unmake what Abigail did. I placed my hand on the altar and spoke the words that came to my mind, words I somehow knew were right. I, Eliza Montgomery, descendant of Abigail, do hereby renounce the pact made in 1723. I return what was taken and reclaim what was given. The debt is paid. The cycle is broken. The twins screamed, a sound of rage and fear that shook the very foundations of the mausoleum. Their forms began dissolving, edges blurring, features melting into indistinct shadows. You can't, they shrieked. The price will be too high. I'm willing to pay it, I said, though I had no idea what the price might be. This ends tonight. A wind rose from nowhere, swirling around the mausoleum, extinguishing the single candle I had lit upon entering. In the sudden darkness, I felt rather than saw the twins' presence weaken, their centuries-old grip on my family finally loosening. There was a moment of absolute silence, a heartbeat of perfect stillness. Then a blinding light filled the mausoleum, so bright I had to shield my eyes. When it faded, the twins were gone. In their place stood a woman in clothing from another century, her face bearing a strong resemblance to my own. Abigail, I whispered. She nodded, a sad smile on her lips. You've done what I could not, she said, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. You've ended it. The debt is paid. What was the price? I asked. They said there would be a price. Prosperity, she replied simply. The wealth, the success, the privilege our family has enjoyed for generations, it's gone now. You'll be ordinary, Eliza. Just ordinary people living ordinary lives. No special talents, no extraordinary luck, no inexplicable successes. I thought about what she was saying. The Montgomery family fortune, built over centuries, now gone. The advantages I had taken for granted all my life, vanished. But then I thought of the twins, of the malevolence that had haunted my family for generations, of the lives destroyed and the souls corrupted. It's worth it, I said firmly. Abigail smiled, a genuine smile this time, reaching her eyes. I thought you would say that. You're stronger than I was, stronger than any of us. She began to fade, her form becoming transparent. The house will go too, she warned. It was part of the bargain. Get what you need and leave before dawn. With those words, she vanished completely, leaving me alone in the dark mausoleum. I made my way back to the house, finding Catherine in the kitchen, nursing a cup of tea with trembling hands. She looked up as I entered, relief washing over her face. They're gone, she said. It wasn't a question. I felt it, like a weight lifting, a shadow passing. What did you do? I explained what had happened in the mausoleum, the words I had spoken, the appearance of Abigail. Catherine listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. So it's over, she said when I had finished. Truly over, after all these generations. She paused. But at a cost. I reminded her, the family fortune, the house, everything. She laughed, a sound of genuine joy that seemed to brighten the kitchen. A small price to pay for freedom, don't you think? Besides, there are worse things than being ordinary. She rose from her chair, suddenly energetic. We should pack what we can. If Abigail said the house will go, I believe her. We spent the rest of the night gathering what we could, family photographs, personal mementos, items of sentimental rather than monetary value. The journals and records about the twins we burned in the fireplace, watching as centuries of darkness turned to ash. As dawn approached, we loaded Catherine's car and took one last look at the house. In the early morning light, it already seemed diminished somehow, less imposing, less grand. Just an old house slowly crumbling back into the earth. We drove away as the sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the winding dirt road. In the rearview mirror, I watched as the house seemed to waver, like a mirage in the desert heat. Then, between one blink and the next, it was gone, replaced by an empty clearing, as if the Montgomery mansion had never existed at all. Where will you go? Catherine asked as we reached the main road. I hadn't thought that far ahead. My life in the city seemed like a dream now, belonging to someone else entirely. I'm not sure, I admitted. Somewhere new. Somewhere without ghosts. She smiled, her eyes on the road ahead. That sounds perfect. We drove in comfortable silence for a while, the miles stretching behind us, carrying us away from a legacy of darkness and toward something new, something ordinary and therefore precious. I don't know what the future holds for me now. Without the Montgomery fortune, I'll need to make my own way in the world, relying on my own talents and efforts rather than an inherited advantage. The thought is both terrifying and exhilarating. But one thing I know for certain, I will never again have to face what my grandmother faced, what generations of Montgomery women faced before her. I will never have to look into the eyes of my own children and see something ancient and malevolent looking back. I will never have to whisper, "We don't speak of the twins." The curse is broken. The cycle is ended. And that, I think, is worth any price. This has been the Ghastly Journal, and I thank you for accompanying me through tonight's tale. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, subscribe, and share it with those who appreciate life's darker aspects. Until our next encounter,